Germany surrendered in 1945, and the Nazi regime lost the power that had protected its men. Former SS personnel then faced three paths: captivity and trial, disappearance, or a life built under another name. Some defendants heard the charges read aloud in courtrooms. Others crossed borders, changed documents, and stayed hidden for decades. The Allies and intelligence services searched for those responsible for the Holocaust and other war crimes. The first Nuremberg trial opened on November 20, 1945. Its documents turned military defeat into individual accusations. The search did not end there. In 1960, agents captured Adolf Eichmann in Argentina after years under a false identity. Court files, arrest warrants, and international searches kept moving from one name to the next. The later court records led back to the moment Hitler kept his command. By the end of 1944, Germany faced defeat from two directions. Operation Valkyrie had offered senior officers one opening. They planned to kill Hitler, seize control, and release the army from its oath to the Führer. The attempt failed. Hitler remained in power until the collapse of 1945. British and American forces advanced after France was liberated. From the east, Soviet troops began their major offensive on January 12, 1945. The Vistula-Oder operation drove west at speed. Soviet forces were closing on Berlin. As the front closed around the capital, bunker reports still announced victories that no longer existed above ground. Berlin had become the center of the final battle. Hitler remained in his underground shelter while Soviet artillery sounded nearby. The Red Army opened the Berlin operation on the 16th of April, and by the 25th the city was surrounded. Joseph Goebbels kept issuing fictitious accounts of success. Inside the bunker, those reports sustained the illusion. Outside, the city showed something else. Civilians lacked basic supplies. Ruined infrastructure cut across daily life, and many people sought shelter in bunkers or fled toward rural areas. The gap between orders from the leadership and conditions in the streets broke authority into isolated pockets. Regional Nazi party leaders still held on to power. They continued to punish deserters and those who showed discontent. That authority was already splitting at the top. On April 23rd, Hermann Göring sent Hitler a message proposing to assume leadership. Hitler called it treason. Göring fled south, hoping to negotiate surrender with the Allies. Heinrich Himmler made a separate attempt to reach the Western powers. The SS leader was captured and held in custody. His escape ended there. The Reich now had rival moves, missing authority, and no agreed successor. During the early hours of April 29th, Hitler married Eva Braun inside the bunker. He also dictated his final will. Soviet artillery remained close, and reports of its approach continued reaching the underground rooms. The marriage changed nothing outside those walls. At 3:30 in the afternoon on April 30th, a powerful explosion shook the refuge. SS soldiers entered Hitler's office and found Hitler and Eva Braun dead.
Their closest followers carried out written orders and burned the bodies before Allied troops could seize them. The remains were never recovered. Hitler's death left Germany without its dictator, but the fighting did not stop. Joseph Goebbels and Magda Goebbels also died, after ensuring that their 6 children would not be taken alive by the enemy. On May 2nd, Soviet troops occupied the Reichstag building and raised the red flag above it. Berlin had fallen. Yet combat continued in other parts of Germany for several more days because local commanders still controlled armed units and refused to stop. Karl Donitz had taken the leadership of the Reich after Hitler's death. On May 7th, he signed the unconditional surrender. The act entered into force on May 8, 1945. The war in Europe ended on paper, while the search for Nazi perpetrators began across the ruins. Some leading figures tried to disappear before facing court.
Martin Bormann vanished, Heinrich Himmler remained a prisoner, and Robert Ley chose death rather than trial. Hermann Göring, arrested after his attempted challenge to Hitler, was released on May 5th before the final surrender. The bunker had produced its last orders. The next decisions came from Allied investigators, military tribunals, and the hunt for men who had tried to escape Germany. That hunt soon produced a dated record. On July 3, 1946, the United States Army Counterintelligence Corps sent a report to the President. It said Nazi escape routes had existed since at least 1944. The report linked them to the name ODESSA, described as an organization of former SS members. The name was clear. The command was not. No evidence proves that the Nazi government directed one central operation. The routes may have come from separate groups acting independently. Yet the result appears in the exits. Many fugitives crossed borders without detection. Argentina alone sheltered at least 300 former military personnel of the Third Reich. Brazil, Paraguay, and several Middle Eastern countries also became destinations. By the end of 1945, about 10,000 people linked to the Nazi Party had left Germany. That figure points to repeated escape routes, not one isolated hiding place.
Historians also raise possible involvement by the Red Cross, the Vatican, and even the United States Army. Those claims remain disputed. Post-war Germany was devastated. Records were broken, and authorities could not inspect every departure. Fugitives used false identities and posed as displaced persons. The report fixed the scale, even where it could not prove a single command. The report fixed the scale, but individual trails still ended in very different places. One of them stopped at a border in May 1945. Wilhelm Hodel had already made several trips to Switzerland to meet the OSS station chief in Bern. He offered information about German plans for a final defense in the Alps and gold reserves hidden in Austrian mountains. Hodel wanted American favor before the surrender closed every bargaining option. But the front moved faster than negotiations, and Soviet troops were already near Berlin. In May 1945, French troops stopped Hodel at the Swiss border. Liechtenstein detained him, and he returned to Austria looking for somewhere safe. That same month, he surrendered to American forces in Bad Aussee. The Americans later transferred him to Germany, where he entered custody at Klesheim in Salzburg in October 1947. At Nuremberg, prosecutors used Hodel as a witness because he could describe the Nazi leadership from inside its intelligence circles. The trial had opened in November 1945, while many fugitives were still trying to disappear. In December 1947, an agreement with American intelligence secured his release. His testimony opened one path through the post-war pursuit. His cooperation opened another. Afterward, Hodel worked with American services against the Communist Party of Austria and later published several books. His case ended in cooperation. Rudolf Höss faced capture. Höss had commanded Auschwitz, where more than 1.5 million Jews were killed. He hid for almost 5 months in northern Germany, posing as a farmer near the Danish border. His false identity held until American forces detained his wife first. During interrogation, she provided the information that led investigators to the farm.
2 army units surrounded the property and found Höss in sleepwear, unprepared for the arrest. The hiding place failed through a family interrogation, not a battlefield search. Afterward, the Americans transferred him to Auschwitz, where he faced his sentence. His execution took place near the house where he had lived with his family until 1945. The search widened beyond the men already in Allied custody. Gerda Bormann still moved through Germany with 9 children, carrying a false identity into the collapse. Before the war ended, the Allied powers had prepared an international tribunal for Nazi leaders and officials. They needed arrests. They also needed witnesses. Wives of senior Nazis could identify fugitives, records, and routes of escape. After Soviet troops entered Berlin, Gerda left the city with her children. She called herself the director of an orphanage. Some children wore orphan clothes. Under that cover, the family boarded a school bus and crossed into Italy. A local Nazi party leader in South Tyrol hid them and protected the documents Gerda carried. The family then settled in a village about 50 kilometers from Bolzano. For a time, the disguise held. The border lay behind them. But Gerda had ovarian cancer. Her condition worsened, and she needed urgent surgery. Allied intelligence learned where she lived after local inquiries led to a doctor who knew both her illness and location. A British officer came to the house. Gerda expected a prisoner camp. The officer told her she faced no immediate danger. Then British forces sent her to their military hospital in Murano. Surgery did not stop the disease. On March 23, 1946, Gerda Bormann died in Murano, only months before her 37th birthday. After the Bormanns disappeared, Hermann Goering took another route. A Luftwaffe unit freed him on May 5th after his arrest for plotting against Hitler. He went to the American lines, expecting gentler treatment than Soviet captivity. That choice may have kept him alive. Goering reached the American positions and surrendered. The visible surrender ended one part of the story. Beyond the Allied lines, fugitives moved under borrowed names and claimed the status of displaced persons. The Allies first focused on stabilizing the region and rebuilding what remained of Germany, so organized searches came later. Whether Odessa was a real structure or only a label used by American intelligence, escape networks helped thousands of Nazis leave Europe. About 90% crossed the Alps into Italy, usually reaching South Tyrol as their first destination. Only years later did the CIA, Mossad, and MI5 begin concrete efforts to locate, identify, and arrest these criminals around the world.
The next step needed only a priest's signature. In Italy, fugitives hid inside Catholic monasteries, including the Teutonic Knights in Murano, Capuchins near Bressanone, and Franciscans around Bolzano. The route gained a name, the monastery route. It also fed the belief that Vatican officials, and perhaps Pope Pius XII, helped protect war criminals. That belief had a political background. Pius saw communism as the greatest danger facing the Church and the Western world. Some priests in South Tyrol issued identity papers for fugitives. The information was false. The stamp looked official. Those papers opened the next gate. Fugitives used them to obtain Red Cross passports with limited scrutiny. From 1945 to 1951, officials issued at least 120,000 such documents. A monastery offered shelter. A forged certificate supplied identity. The passport carried the fugitive beyond Italy. American authorities noticed the pattern before the decade ended. In 1946, prisoners escaped in large numbers from a camp near Rimini. American soldiers then found former SS officers hiding in local monasteries. The men possessed travel documents issued through the Red Cross. Another discovery began in Rome. After American troops arrived, Georgian clerics received permission to establish a seminary. Months later, Allied officials noticed that several seminarians appeared to have romantic relationships. An inspection exposed the real purpose of the building. SS officers had turned it into a refuge. In the basement, they operated a radio station equipped with advanced technology. One name appeared repeatedly in the record. Alois Hudal, an Austrian bishop, had openly supported Hitler's regime. Later, he defended the false papers. He claimed that many of those pursued after the war were innocent. For him, helping them escape was the correct decision. The documents carried the fugitives toward another country. The forged identity came first. The Red Cross passport followed. By the time officials understood the route, the paperwork had already opened the border. That paperwork could carry a fugitive beyond Italy, into Spain, ruled by Generalissimo Francisco Franco. Spain was an accessible destination for escape, yet no precise official register records how many former members of the Nazi regime settled there. The gap hid the scale. In later decades, neo-Nazi groups appeared across the country, but their presence cannot establish an exact total. Leon de Grelle was one documented refugee. He had commanded the Walloon SS and lived in Malaga, speaking from hiding without facing trial for his war crimes. In the 1980s, authorities charged him over Holocaust denial.
Behind the charges against de Grelle stood a broader network, It had a name, Stille Hilfe, or Silent Help. The organization was founded in Munich and spread its work across Germany and other countries after the war. Munich had been the cradle of the Nazi Party 3 decades earlier. Its purpose was direct. Stille Hilfe supported former SS members who had been arrested, convicted, or remained fugitives. The group supplied legal assistance, money, contacts, and help with concealment. Some beneficiaries needed lawyers, others needed a route out. In 1951, Stille Hilfe gained legal status as a non-profit organization. Donations could now finance its activities through an official structure. From the beginning of the Nuremberg Trials, members campaigned against death sentences. They sent personal letters, collective appeals, and petitions to authorities. Their message presented convicted men as victims rather than perpetrators. Rudolf Aschenauer handled the legal work.
He represented detainees, prepared clemency requests, and filed appeals against sentences. The organization also sought prison leave, financial compensation, and assistance for prisoners' families. Legal defense stood beside political pressure. The campaign moved beyond courtrooms. Stille Hilfe organized meetings, promoted revisionist claims, and sent demands to government offices. Some documents challenged a sentence. Others kept a fugitive supplied and hidden. The same network could support an appeal, collect donations, and arrange an escape. Its assistance reached routes toward South America and the Middle East. Johann von Leers became one of its beneficiaries. He had served in the Waffen-SS and edited material inside the propaganda ministry. After the war, Stille Hilfe connected such men with the resources needed to avoid arrest and continue moving under protection. The hidden route carried Franz von Leers through Italy, then across the Atlantic to Argentina. He stayed in Italy for 5 years. In 1950, Buenos Aires became his next base, where he continued his ideological work and joined Der Weg, a Nazi-leaning publication founded there in 1947. Ha-Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, praised von Leers for supporting Arab nationalism. Their contact pushed him toward Islam and Egypt, where he advised Abdel Nasser's government on propaganda materials. Stille Hilfe also assisted Erich Priebke. His name was tied to the massacre at the Ardeatine Caves near Rome. On March 24, 1944, more than 330 civilians were taken underground with their hands bound. Guards called their names, then led them inside in groups of 5. Priebke supervised the procedure and used an Italian machine gun to kill 2 victims. The killings ended before nightfall.
The caves were sealed with explosives. Afterward, Priebke left Italy through Latvia and boarded a ship for Argentina. He settled in Bariloche under the name Otto Pape. For almost 50 years, he remained outside public view while living under that identity. His past surfaced only decades later, and Italy received him through extradition in 1995. 3 years later, an Italian court sentenced him to life imprisonment. He spent his final days under house arrest. Another case ended before any courtroom ruling. Walter Rauff designed mobile gas chambers inside modified trucks. Engine exhaust was directed into the sealed rear compartment. The engine kept running. The cargo space filled with toxic fumes. A capture report attributed at least 97,000 deaths to these vehicles. In 1949, Rauff fled with his wife and children. Their clandestine route passed through Quito, Ecuador, before reaching Chile. 14 years later, West Germany requested his extradition. Chilean authorities refused, citing the statute of limitations under local law. Rauff remained in Chile, where he prospered in the food industry. He died there of a heart attack on May 14, 1984. Franz Stangl took another route. For 16 years, the former SS commander held a job at Volkswagen Brazil. Police arrested him in 1967. Earlier, T4 enlisted him, and he later ran killing sites at Treblinka, Sobibor, and Trieste. Hundreds of thousands of people died there. His arrest brought him to trial. In 1971, A heart attack killed Stangl before the court issued its sentence. Stangl's unfinished case led investigators farther back, to Joseph Mengele moving toward Bavaria after Hitler's death. At Auschwitz, Mengele conducted selections that separated prisoners from one another. His decisions sent elderly people, sick prisoners, pregnant women, and children to the gas chambers. Prisoners in better physical condition remained alive for a time and were sent elsewhere. They had to undress, their hair was cut, and they were transferred to the hospital. There, Mengele invoked racial hygiene, a pseudoscientific doctrine used to claim racial superiority. He focused particular attention on twins. Operations were performed without anesthesia, and healthy limbs were amputated during some of these procedures. Other interventions introduced viruses into prisoners' bodies and deliberately infected their wounds. Mengele sought to observe how people he labeled inferior responded to pain, disease, and extreme stress. After Hitler died, Mengele traveled with a group of German soldiers toward Bavaria, then under American control. American troops disarmed the group and took them to the Steinstein prisoner of war camp, about 120 kilometers from Nuremberg. At the camp, Mengele met Dr. Keir, an old acquaintance. The American guards did not know his real identity, and an SS blood group tattoo was absent from his arm. He called himself Joseph Mengele, and he and Dr. Keir deceived the American guards. The missing tattoo left no record on his arm. American guards released Mengele and Dr. Keir as ordinary doctors. Afterward, Mengele went toward Auschwitz to recover notes he considered valuable. He then crossed the southern border into Italy. In Genoa in 1949, he obtained a Red Cross passport under the name Helmut Greger. That July, he sailed for Argentina and settled in Vicente Lopez. He first worked as a carpenter. Later, he sold agricultural machinery. Believing nobody searched for him, he began using his real name again. That confidence broke in 1958. Authorities questioned Mengele and other doctors after a young woman died during an abortion procedure. They brought no charges. Still, the inquiry exposed the risk of identification. He left for Paraguay. In 1959, he received Paraguayan citizenship as José Mengele.
His name had appeared during the Nuremberg proceedings in the late 1940s, yet Allied authorities assumed he had probably died. Mossad began searching in the 1960s. Its agents intended to capture Mengele and bring him to trial in Israel. Investigators in Paraguay found no clear trace. Attempts to follow his correspondence with his wife Martha in Italy also failed. Agents later reached a rural area outside Sao Paulo. There, they identified a European man who might have been Mengele. The evidence did not confirm his identity. Mossad halted the operation in 1962. Mengele remained in southern Brazil. In 1979, he suffered a stroke while swimming and drowned.
The search around Sao Paulo had stopped. A different name then reached Mossad officers, Herbert Kukers. In the 1960s, Israel chose to act without international tribunals. Mossad received the task of finding Kukers and carrying out an operation against him. No tribunal led it. Kukers was known as the Butcher of Riga. Latvian Jews linked him to the executions of at least 30,000 Jews. The operation aimed to remove him and make those crimes public. It also sent a warning to other wanted Nazi criminals. Israel did not officially acknowledge responsibility. Documents carried the name of the man sought. The state left the operation without public authorship.
86 Jews were arrested on Barbie's order in Lyon. Decades later, fingerprints would confirm the man behind that raid. The proof appeared in La Paz. In 1971, French groups tracking Nazi fugitives identified Barbie in Peru. France and Bolivia had no extradition agreement. He remained protected by that gap. A year later, a journalist found him in La Paz and asked about the German war criminal. Barbie denied knowing the name. The journalist placed photographs of victims before him. Barbie denied recognizing them. Then he returned the photographs. His fingerprints stayed on the paper. Those prints confirmed his identity, but Bolivia still refused extradition. The government changed after a new democratic administration took power. Authorities arrested Barbie and sent him to France. The legal process finally moved forward. In 1984, prosecutors examined his crimes as head of the Gestapo in Lyon between 1942 and 1944.
The Rue St. Catherine raid became one central case. Barbie chose a Tuesday because a Jewish federation provided assistance and free food that day. His men detained the workers first. Then they arrested every person entering the building. None returned home. The deportees went to Bergen-Belsen, Sobibor, and Auschwitz. Only 3 survived. The records connected the arrests, the deportations, and Barbie's command. On July 4, 1987, a French court found Klaus Barbie guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment. His case differed sharply from Robert John Verbelen's. Verbelen belonged to the Flemish SS and carried responsibility for at least 101 murders in Belgium. He ordered executions and carried out grenade attacks in bars and cafes. In 1946, American authorities recruited him in Austria for Project Newton, an operation aimed at infiltrating the Austrian Communist Party. The Counterintelligence Corps, a United States Army intelligence service, handled such post-war recruitment. Verbelen gained Austrian citizenship in 1959. In 1965, he faced trial for war crimes. Despite the evidence, the court acquitted him. He lived freely until his death in 1990. Barbie's identity produced extradition only after Bolivia changed governments. Verbelen's identity produced acquittal. The post-war record held both outcomes. One ended with a life sentence on July 4, 1987.
The verdict led back to Lyon and to an SS officer named Klaus Barbie. After Germany occupied France, officials first sent Barbie to Dijon. Soon afterward, they transferred him to Lyon. He made the Hotel Terminus his base. Its corridors led to interrogation rooms. Barbie tortured detainees there, adults and children alike. He also trained German shepherd dogs to attack prisoners. French authorities linked him to the deaths of an estimated 14,000 people in France. After the war, France's provisional government sentenced Barbie to death in absentia. His location remained unknown. Then France learned that American forces held him. French officials demanded his extradition. The request failed.
American forces helped Barbie leave for Bolivia under the name Klaus Altmann. He lived there for 3 decades under that identity. The Counterintelligence Corps used him while it opposed communism in Latin America. Barbie also kept close ties with military governments in Bolivia and Peru. His escape route ended in Bolivia. His name was Klaus Altmann. The trail that ran through South America led to Montevideo. In 1965, Herbert Cookers entered a rented house after an invitation tied to an aviation business. His contact used the name Anton Kunzle. He was Yakov Medad, who had taken part in Adolf Eichmann's capture in Argentina in 1960. A telegram from Montevideo brought Cookers to the secluded address, where several men were already waiting. Cookers resisted inside the house. He bit one attacker, then a hammer blow to the head ended the struggle. He asked to speak before the men decided his fate. No one answered. 2 shots to the head followed. On March 6th, investigators found his body in a trunk. Documents beside it connected Cookers to crimes in the Riga ghetto. Those papers pointed beyond the Riga ghetto, toward 300 Latvians in the Arise Commando. Cookers had become an assistant to its leader during the German occupation. Before the war, Latvia knew him as an aviator. In 1933, he assembled an aircraft himself and flew it from Latvia to Gambia. Newspapers compared him with Charles Lindbergh. At the end of 1939, he made another long journey, this time to Palestine. Then, Latvia passed under Soviet control in 1940. A year later, the German invasion of the Soviet Union brought Nazi rule to Latvia. In occupied Riga, the Arise Commando pursued Jewish residents and killed thousands of them. The group had 300 Latvian members. Its men shot people in the streets, robbed their victims, and carried out killings across the city. Kukor stood close to the unit's leadership while it operated there. The records beside his body returned investigators to that period. Rumbula became one of the entries in those records. On November 30th and December 8th, 1941, about 25,000 people were killed near the Rumbula forest. The dates remained in the evidence. So did accounts connecting Kukors to the massacre. After the war, he left for Brazil under his own name. He did not adopt a false identity or disappear into an anonymous life. He met members of the local Jewish community and called himself a political refugee. He also claimed that he had saved Jews during the Holocaust. Some people accepted that account for a time. But his past stayed open to examination. Public appearances and contact with the Jewish community brought renewed attention to his record in Riga.
Over the years, the claim that he had rescued Jews fell apart. Mossad located him. German proceedings were expected, yet no German court ever tried him. In 1965, an undercover Mossad agent offered him an aviation business venture in Uruguay. Kukors accepted the invitation. The court case that had been expected in Germany never took place. One expected case had vanished in Germany. In Olivos, another suspicion rested on a quiet visit to Chacabuco 4261. Sylvia's father heard Eichmann's surname during a Frankfurt war crimes trial. It matched the name of his daughter's former boyfriend. He took that suspicion to Frankfurt prosecutor Fritz Bauer, who demanded an exact address and firmer proof. But beatings in Dachau during the 1930s had left Sylvia's father blind. He could not search Olivos himself. Sylvia went in his place. After making inquiries, she found the address: Chacabuco, 4261. On a Sunday afternoon, she knocked at the house. Vera Eichmann opened the door. She said Klaus was away, then invited Sylvia inside for coffee and cake. Sylvia accepted, and soon another man joined their conversation. Sylvia asked whether he was Klaus's father. He denied it. He called himself Klaus's uncle. Then Klaus entered the kitchen and saw Sylvia.
He ordered her out. At the door, Klaus said he would take Sylvia to the bus. The man who claimed to be his uncle said he should escort her home instead. Klaus answered, "Thank you, Father. I will make sure she gets home safely." The address was no longer only a lead. Sylvia and her father told Bauer that Adolf Eichmann lived openly in a Buenos Aires neighborhood. Bauer treated the testimony as important, but he still needed more evidence before any large operation beyond Germany could begin. To verify that address, investigators first had to reconstruct how Adolf Eichmann reached Olivos under another name. In 1948, a support network linked to Bishop Alois Hudal supplied false documents. The route ran through Italy. Then he settled in Olivos, a Buenos Aires neighborhood, as Ricardo Clement. He kept a quiet profile. Eichmann found work at the Mercedes-Benz factory and eventually headed a department. His wife and children joined him soon afterward. The false name held. Then Klaus met Sylvia, a young German woman whose father had survived Dachau. Klaus did not know that Sylvia came from a Jewish family. He made offensive remarks, claiming the Nazis had not finished exterminating certain groups. The relationship ended. The following year, Sylvia's father heard testimony at a war crimes trial in Frankfurt. That testimony named Adolf Eichmann as a key figure in the annihilation of the Jewish people. The words in court tied the Olivos household to the man investigators were trying to identify.
The Olivos address mattered because Eichmann had already learned to erase the trail behind him. Before Argentina, he hid under the name Otto Eckmann and destroyed records in Berlin. Born in Solingen in 1906, Adolf Eichmann became a high-ranking SS officer during the Second World War. After the Wannsee Conference in 1942, he organized mass deportations of Jews to extermination camps. He did not need to stand inside the camps. His work moved people toward them. The deportations made the killings possible across occupied Europe. On December 24, 1944, Eichmann left Budapest before Soviet forces encircled the city. He returned to Berlin. There, he destroyed documentary traces of his own work. Papers disappeared first, then he prepared to disappear himself. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. American troops detained Eichmann, but his false documents identified him as Otto Eichmann.
He passed through camps for Nazi officers under that name. When discovery became likely, he escaped from a labor camp in Cham, Germany. By then, Rudolf Höss had named Eichmann during the Nuremberg Trials. The alias could delay identification. It could not erase that testimony. Eichmann understood the danger and left no room for his real name. In Berlin, documents had gone into destruction before the escape route even began. Those missing records forced investigators to depend on witnesses, family connections, and one address in Argentina. Eichmann had removed the paper trail. He now had to vanish completely.
The missing papers made false identities more valuable. Franz Stangl left Linz prison in 1948 and moved south. His route ran through Graz, Murano, and Florence before reaching Rome. He traveled with documents that did not identify him by his real name. In Rome, Austrian Bishop Alois Hudel took him in. Hudel supplied papers for the next crossing. Those papers opened a route beyond Germany. Stangl could travel towards Syria, where his family later joined him. In 1951, the Stangls moved to Brazil. The journey had shown other fugitives a usable passage. Alois Brunner remained free at that point. During the war, he held a senior post in the Gestapo. He was Adolf Eichmann's main collaborator and headed the Jewish Affairs Department. Eichmann called him his best agent. Brunner organized mass deportations and killings in France, Greece, and Slovakia. After Germany's defeat, he hid inside Germany under protection from old allies.
In 1954, a French court sentenced him to death in absentia. He believed the authorities were closing in. He followed the route south through Egypt. Gamal Abdel Nasser's government employed German specialists in military technology and missiles. Brunner offered no comparable technical expertise. His record lay in deportations and murder. Amin al-Husseini helped Brunner reach Syria. In 1955, Syrian authorities issued him a work visa. He entered Damascus under a new layer of protection. There, the fugitive joined a circle of former Nazis. Franz Rademacher had served in the Third Reich Foreign Ministry. Wilhelm Beisner had been a German spy assigned to plans for Palestine if Germany won. With Brunner, they formed the Orient Trading Company in Damascus. The firm concealed an arms trafficking business. Their contacts acquired weapons from the communist bloc. They supplied them to Algeria's National Liberation Front during its struggle against French rule. Brunner built a large fortune from that trade. For a time, Damascus gave him room to stay hidden. Then the protection began to weaken. By 1959, Syrian agents had started tracking Brunner's movements. They watched the man who had crossed Europe with old documents and old connections. By the time Brunner's trail narrowed in Syria, Weisenthal's name was already linked to the pursuit of 1,100 Nazi criminals. The number made his reputation, but the record behind it was uneven. From the end of the Second World War until his death in 2005, Weisenthal gave inaccurate accounts of his work pursuing Nazi criminals. He invented stories about his wartime past and altered details of his academic education. A stack of newspaper clippings preserved different versions of the same biography. That did not erase the cases connected to his work. His information and persistence helped bring several war criminals before a court, even while parts of his own story required checking. The result was a divided record. Real assistance in prosecutions, alongside claims that could not withstand comparison with the evidence. Simon Wiesenthal remained a controversial figure, remembered for concrete court results and for accounts of his past that proved unreliable. Behind the public name stood an archive. Simon Wiesenthal founded the Jewish Historical Documentation Center in Austria, where it gathered information on war crime perpetrators and helped displaced persons. Witnesses gave statements, while Wiesenthal recorded accounts of the Holocaust and preserved them in working files. The search also needed attention outside the office. He used newspapers and other media to keep Nazi investigations in view. From the 1960s onward, his name became linked with the pursuit of Nazi criminals. Wiesenthal believed responsibility reached from senior officials to ordinary collaborators. Recognition followed. He received at least 53 honors, including major state distinctions in Britain, the United States, and France, and he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 4 times. Those awards did not replace the records. The center preserved testimonies and documents that supported later searches and court cases. On desks in Austria, folders accumulated names, statements, and leads about war criminals. Those records narrowed the search to a man who walked each evening toward a bus stop near Garibaldi Street. Argentina had rejected extradition requests for Nazis before. David Ben-Gurion ordered Eichmann's capture and transfer to Israel for trial. In April 1960, 8 agents arrived in Buenos Aires. They watched his routine for weeks. Eichmann normally rode the same bus home. On May 11th, near his home in San Fernando, that bus arrived without him. The operation nearly failed. Half an hour later, he stepped from another bus. Peter Malkin approached and spoke in Spanish. He asked whether he could ask a question. Eichmann tried to leave, but 2 agents seized him. He struggled until they forced him into a car and covered him with a blanket. Agents kept him for 9 days in a safe house, where they checked his identity again. On the night of May 20th, anesthesiologist Yona Elian sedated Eichmann and dressed him as a flight attendant.
An Israeli aircraft took him from Argentina. In Israel, police held him for 9 months in a fortified station and questioned him daily. The trial opened on April 11th, 1961. Eichmann faced 15 charges, including crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, and membership in a criminal organization. Shortly after midnight on June 1st, 1962, prison staff carried out his sentence at Ramla Prison.
That sentence at Ramla rested on an identification built from earlier fragments of evidence. Simon Wiesenthal had survived the Holocaust. He spent nearly 3 years imprisoned in Janowska and Krakow-Plaszow, then survived a death march to Mauthausen. After the war, Wiesenthal pursued Nazi criminals. In 1953, a letter reported Eichmann had been seen in Buenos Aires. A year later, Wiesenthal took that information to the Israeli consulate in Vienna. The missing evidence was current photographs. Eichmann's father died in 1960, and Wiesenthal arranged for private detectives to photograph the fugitives' relatives. Otto Eichmann resembled his brother, while no recent photograph of Adolf Eichmann was available. The likeness gave investigators material to compare. On February 18th, Wiesenthal passed the photographs to Mossad agents. Those images supported the identity check that preceded the operation in Argentina.
The identity check opened one case. The wider search continued after the war. The Holocaust unfolded between 1933 and 1945. Nazi Germany fell, but criminal files remained open. Some perpetrators disappeared through escape routes leading to South America. Others reached the Middle East, while European regimes sheltered fugitives for strategic reasons. Names crossed borders. Investigators followed fragments of evidence for years, tracing people who had vanished after the crimes. A smaller group was caught and brought before courts. The arrests produced trials, testimony, and records. But time changed the legal picture. Many suspects died before investigators reached them, while others became too ill or unable to stand trial. The empty place in a courtroom often represented decades lost after the crimes. German investigators kept opening files. The Central Office for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes continued collecting leads, checking identities, and examining cases linked to the Holocaust. Its work connected post-war evidence with prosecutions that arrived in old age. Some defendants answered in court. Many never did. The office kept the names, escape routes, and case records together.
In 2013, the central office listed 30 former Auschwitz workers for immediate prosecution. The list was not a trial. It only identified people investigators believed could still reach court. Most were already around 90. Guards, kitchen workers, doctors, and communications operators appeared among them. Since the beginning of the 21st century, this procedure produced 6 trials. Yet identifying a suspect remains separate from proving that the person could endure proceedings. Time narrowed the choice. Illness intervened. Death ended cases. Only 5 of the 30 Auschwitz workers reached court. The others died before appearing or were declared unfit to stand trial. Each file moved from a name to evidence to a medical assessment and finally to a courtroom that might never open. The distinction mattered. A suspect could be identified, documented, and prepared for prosecution, yet never face a judge. By then, the central office was no longer measuring arrests. It was recording which cases remained legally possible. Death and incapacity closed the remaining files before judgment.
Fewer defendants could still appear in court. Investigators therefore turned to names remaining in their files. Each identification had to become a case before age or illness closed another path. In 2018, they identified Johann Rehbogen, then 94, as a former guard at the Stutthof concentration camp. He had served there from 1942 to 1944. Rehbogen was not yet 21 when the alleged acts occurred. A juvenile court in Munster therefore heard his case. Prosecutors charged him over the deaths of more than 100 Polish prisoners and 77 Soviet soldiers killed with Zyklon B gas. The court file had to connect his identity, his age, and his service record. Identification alone did not settle whether a trial could begin. Bruno Day's case followed a year later. In 2019, he received a sentence at 93. His case concerned complicity in the murder of more than 5,000 people at an extermination camp from 1944 to 1945. Finding a suspect was only the first step. Regional prosecutors still had to decide whether the available evidence could take the case to court. That work begins in Ludwigsburg. Since 1958, the Central Office for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes has traced living Holocaust perpetrators who have not faced justice and can still stand trial. The office collects the material and sends cases to regional prosecutors. Around 30 living suspects are identified each year. Regional prosecutors then spend about a year examining whether the proof can support a trial. While German prosecutors reviewed old cases, Damascus answered extradition requests with one formula: Brunner was not in the country. The replies came from Austria, West Germany, and the United States throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Serge and Beate Klarsfeld kept the pressure in the media, and Brunner made that refuge harder to defend. He gave interviews to German, Austrian, and international outlets, even after the president ordered him to avoid attention. The warnings failed. His movements became restricted, and his value to the authorities declined as his name kept returning to public reports. Each interview turned a hidden resident into a political problem that could no longer stay hidden. In 1996, Syrian officials removed Brunner from his residence and took him to the Muhajirun police station. They locked him in an underground cell. The door closed. Brunner remained there for the rest of his life, under conditions marked by neglect and filth. He is believed to have died in 2010. The locked door of 1996 leads back to late 1959. Syrian authorities detained Alois Brunner and took him to a secret facility where prisoners of war faced interrogation and torture. Officers suspected an undercover agent. They accused Brunner of drug trafficking and ordered him held until they clarified his case. He remained in custody. Then Brunner spoke about his role in the persecution of Jews. The captain directing the questioning stood and offered his hand. Suspicion gave way to an offer of cooperation. Brunner accepted the handshake. From that point, he began working with Syrian authorities.